I never expected my best friend's sister to walk into my room, or his aunt to follow. What happened next changed everything. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm. My room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a desk lamp pooling over scattered notebooks and a half-empty coffee mug. I was alone, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, lost in my thoughts and the calm monotony of my routine. It was the kind of silence that felt safe, almost protective, a pause from the constant noise of life. Then, without warning, the door creaked open. I glanced up, expecting my best friend, or maybe just the wind, but it wasn't him. It was his sister. She stood in the doorway, a mixture of confidence and hesitation in her posture. Her hand lingered lightly on the frame, as if she wasn't entirely sure she belonged here, yet her presence immediately filled the room. There was an elegance to her that seemed effortless. The way her hair fell across her shoulders, the subtle warmth of her smile, the quiet steadiness in her gaze. I felt a jolt of surprise, and something else I couldn't name. My heartbeat seemed louder all of a sudden, echoing in the small space. There was a pause, a brief, weightless moment where neither of us spoke, and yet the air between us shifted. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, soft and floral, blending with the faint aroma of coffee and old books. Her eyes met mine, a flash of amusement or maybe curiosity, dancing in them. "Hey!" she said, her voice calm but carrying a subtle lilt that made it impossible to ignore. It was casual, yet somehow intimate, like the kind of greeting that opens doors to stories yet untold. Hey!" I stammered, trying to appear composed. My hands itched to do something, anything, but I settled for leaning slightly against my desk. Her presence made the familiar room feel different, warmer, more alive. She stepped further inside, the soft brush of her foot against the carpet, and the air seemed to hum around her. My eyes couldn't help following the little details. The slight tilt of her head as she studied the scattered notebooks, the way her fingers lightly traced the edge of my desk, the almost imperceptible laugh that lingered in the corners of her mouth. For a moment, everything else faded. The world outside my room, the noise, the responsibilities, the distractions, felt distant, irrelevant. It was just us, sharing a quiet, unspoken connection that neither of us had named. Then, just as I was beginning to settle into the warmth of her presence, my mind raced with questions. What was she doing here? How long would she stay? And why did a simple, unexpected visit feel like something more, something I wasn't prepared for? The moment hung between us, fragile yet electric. There was no rush, no need to fill the silence with meaningless words. The way she leaned lightly against the doorway, the way our eyes met and held, said everything we weren't ready to say out loud. In that brief, fleeting instant, I realized that the ordinary evening I had planned had already changed, forever. Just as the room began to settle into a quiet rhythm, the kind of rhythm where conversation flows effortlessly, yet nothing is rushed, another presence made itself known. I was just beginning to notice the way her smile lit the corners of the room, how her laughter seemed to linger even after she stopped speaking, when the door creaked again. My heart skipped a beat, and a faint blush crept across my cheeks. It wasn't the wind this time, nor was it my best friend. Standing behind her, almost like a shadow I hadn't expected, was his aunt. Her expression was a mix of amusement and curiosity, her eyes twinkling as though she already knew she had walked into the perfect kind of chaos. The timing was absurd, and for a moment, all I could do was stare, caught between surprise and mild embarrassment. My chest felt tight, like the air itself had thickened. The sister's eyes widened slightly, a quick flash of panic, or was it delight, passing through them. The contrast between her composed demeanor and the sudden intrusion made the situation feel both surreal and strangely intimate. I started, but words failed me. My voice felt smaller in the sudden presence of two women in my room. The sister took a step closer to me, subtly shielding me from the full weight of the interruption without saying a word. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for something on the desk, just the lightest touch, but it was enough to send a warm current through me. The sensation was electric, grounding me in the moment while simultaneously heightening the absurdity of our situation. Her aunt, completely unaware of the silent tension brewing, spoke in a cheerful, teasing tone. "Well, this is a surprise. Mind if I join you?" Her voice was warm, familiar, and somehow even more embarrassing than the initial shock. I managed a strained laugh, trying to appear calm, while my mind raced with all the possible ways to navigate this unexpected intrusion. Meanwhile, the sister's presence remained magnetic. She leaned slightly against the doorframe, her posture casual but intimate, creating a bubble of subtle tension around us. Every glance she gave me was charged with a quiet awareness, as if she, too, recognized the delicate line we were walking between innocence and something more. I felt the faint warmth of her body close to mine, the soft brush of her hair against my shoulder as she shifted position. Despite the awkwardness, there was an undeniable charm in the moment. The intrusion wasn't threatening. It was oddly comforting, like life itself had decided to throw us together in a scenario that demanded attention and presence. Even as I struggled to find the right words, a strange connection had already formed. The sister and I were navigating this tiny storm together, sharing unspoken glances, subtle smiles, and the quiet thrill of proximity. By the time the laughter settled and the initial surprise faded, something had changed. The room felt warmer, smaller, more alive. I realized that the intrusion, for all its chaos, had deepened the connection I felt with her. The awkwardness wasn't a disruption. It was the first step toward an intimacy that neither of us could ignore. Once the initial shock of the aunt's unexpected appearance had passed, the room slowly found a new rhythm. It was chaotic, yes, but not unpleasant, the kind of chaos that draws people closer rather than pushing them apart. The aunt, full of cheerful energy, busied herself with trivial chatter, giving the sister and me the chance to sink into quieter, more meaningful moments, even amid the intrusion. I noticed her in the small details, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while pretending to focus on the aunt's words, the faint rise of her shoulders when she laughed at something I said, a soft, melodic sound that lingered longer than it should. The warmth of her presence was subtle but undeniable. It was like the room had suddenly contracted, drawing us into a shared space that existed solely between us. As we navigated the conversation, our interactions grew increasingly natural. She leaned slightly closer to hear me over the aunt's playful commentary, and in doing so, our knees brushed under the desk. It was a fleeting, almost accidental touch, but it sent a quiet thrill through me. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, and for a brief moment, I was keenly aware of how her presence made everything else fade away. The background noise, the clutter, even the awkward intrusion itself. Her gestures were deliberate yet unconscious. When she picked up a pen to jot something down, our fingers touched briefly, lingering longer than necessary. I wanted to pull away, to maintain some semblance of composure, but the warmth of her hand against mine held me in place. It wasn't a charged look of lust. It was connection, intimacy, and unspoken understanding all at once. We shared laughter too. Quiet, conspiratorial laughter that threaded itself between the larger noise of the aunt's chatter. There was a subtle rhythm to our exchange, a give and take that went beyond words. Every glance, every tilt of her head, every flicker of amusement in her eyes felt loaded with unspoken communication. Even her silence spoke volumes. A pause here, a hesitant smile there, conveyed emotions I wasn't sure I was ready to name. At one point, as the aunt moved across the room, she leaned closer to me under the pretense of pointing something out in a notebook. Her shoulder brushed mine, and I felt the faint steadiness of her heartbeat against my side. My breath caught, and for the first time, I realized how natural and right it felt to be close to her, even in such a small, ordinary way. The beauty of this moment was in its subtlety. There was no grand declaration, no overt gesture, just presence. Shared glances, light touches, and quiet laughter created a bond that neither of us needed to explain. In the chaos of the room, with the aunt wandering around like a cheerful storm, we had carved out a private world of connection and understanding. By the end of this part, the foundation was set. Something unspoken had passed between us, something that went beyond curiosity or attraction. It was familiarity, warmth, and the quiet acknowledgement that our relationship, whatever it would become, was beginning to bloom in its own delicate, unhurried way. The aunt finally excused herself, claiming she needed to check on something in the kitchen. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was quieter now, more intimate, as though the walls themselves had leaned in to eavesdrop on what was about to unfold. The sister turned toward me, her expression softening in a way I hadn't seen before. There was a flicker of hesitancy in her eyes, a vulnerability that contrasted with her usual poised demeanor. For a heartbeat, we simply stood there, taking in the sudden stillness. She leaned lightly against the edge of my desk, her shoulder brushing against mine. It was an accidental closeness, yet neither of us moved away. The warmth of her presence pressed gently against me, a comforting weight that made it hard to focus on anything else. I could hear her breathing, steady but slightly uneven, as if she were bracing herself to say something meaningful. "I don't usually talk about this," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying a tremor that made my chest tighten. She paused, searching my face for a reaction, for some sign that it was safe to continue. The way she looked at me then, eyes wide, honest and almost fragile, was disarming. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that it was okay to let her guard down, but I also wanted to simply exist in that moment, letting the silence speak for us. She shared a personal story, something about a challenge she had faced recently, a small but significant struggle that revealed a side of her I had never seen. I listened intently, aware of every nuance. The subtle shift in her hands as they rested on the desk, the way her lips pressed together briefly before forming a smile, the way her gaze wavered just enough to show both strength and fragility. Without thinking, I reached out and let my hand brush against hers, not in a calculated gesture, but in the natural rhythm of reassurance. Her fingers twitched slightly against mine, and I felt a spark of connection that was almost tangible. It wasn't romantic in an overt way. It was something quieter, deeper, an acknowledgement that we were both present, both human, both willing to share this fragile moment. We didn't need words to fill the room. Every glance, every slight smile, every hesitant laugh carried the weight of understanding. I could feel her warmth more acutely now, the proximity making it impossible to ignore the subtle pull between us. Even as she spoke, I noticed the small, unconscious gestures. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes searched mine for empathy. By the time she finished, the room had changed. We had crossed an invisible line, from casual familiarity to something far more intimate. There was no confession of love, no dramatic declaration, just the quiet acknowledgement that our bond had deepened. A shared vulnerability had opened the door to trust, and the tension between us had grown richer, more charged, yet entirely safe. As we sat there in the soft glow of the lamp, I realized something profound. It wasn't about the words she had spoken, but about the space we had created together. A space where closeness, warmth, and understanding could flourish, laying the groundwork for a slow, meaningful romance that neither of us were ready to name aloud, but both of us felt deeply. The room felt different now. The warmth between us lingered, soft yet electric, like the faint hum of a tune just out of reach. The aunt had left, leaving us alone again, but her absence didn't make the space easier to navigate. It made it heavier. The conversation slowed, not from a lack of words, but from the weight of unspoken feelings, the delicate balance of what could and couldn't be said. She shifted in her seat slightly, leaning closer under the pretense of reaching for a notebook, and our knees brushed once more. It was a brief, accidental contact, or at least that's what we told ourselves, but it sent a small, undeniable spark through me. My pulse quickened, my senses sharpening. Every subtle movement she made, the tilt of her head, the flicker of her eyes toward mine, the way her fingers lingered on the desk, felt deliberate, yet entirely unconscious. I wasn't sure if I should come," she murmured, almost to herself, her voice barely breaking the silence. There was a vulnerability in it, an honesty that made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach out to reassure her, but I hesitated, aware of the weight of propriety, of expectations, and of my own conflicted feelings. My hand twitched, itching to bridge the space between us, but I froze, letting the moment breathe. Her glance caught mine then, lingering longer than necessary, heavy with meaning yet shy of confession. The slow-burn tension between us wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, patient, building layer by layer with each shared smile, each fleeting touch, even the small, mundane acts. The way she adjusted her sleeve, the way I handed her a pen, carried the weight of possibility. We talked about trivial things, laughter punctuating our awkward pauses. But beneath the surface, every gesture, every look, carried a deeper significance. When our hands brushed as she picked up her cup of tea, it was electric, the warmth of her skin sending a ripple of awareness through me. When I leaned slightly to hear her better, the subtle closeness, the shared breath, made the room feel smaller, charged with intimacy. And yet, hesitation hung like a shadow over us. I wanted to ask if she felt the same pull I did, wanted to close the gap that lingered between our bodies and hearts, but fear held me back. Not fear of her, but fear of disrupting the delicate rhythm we had found. The tension was a living thing, breathing and shifting with every subtle glance, every accidental touch. She shifted again, brushing a lock of hair from her face, and I noticed how natural yet intimate it felt to be near her. My chest ached in that peculiar, quiet way that comes with recognizing desire but holding back. There was a promise in the pauses, a weight in the silence that neither of us needed to fill. By the end of the moment, we both sat in quiet awareness, hearts beating slightly faster, senses heightened, and emotions unspoken yet understood. Hesitation wasn't weakness. It was the slow, deliberate unfolding of something far more compelling. The tension had deepened, the attraction sharpened, and every accidental brush, every lingering glance, every unspoken thought had pushed us closer to something we both feared and desired. The quiet that had settled over the room was almost tangible. We sat across from each other, words slowing, glances lingering, and every subtle movement carrying weight. The earlier hesitation had transformed into a simmering awareness, a delicate, electric tension neither of us had the courage to name aloud. I felt her presence more acutely now, the warmth radiating from her body, the softness in her gaze, and the way her small, unconscious gestures seemed to ripple across the space between us. And then, a small accident shattered the fragile calm. A notebook slipped from her lap, tumbling toward the floor. Without thinking, we both reached for it, our hands brushing, fingers intertwining for just a fleeting second. The spark it sent through me was immediate, intense, yet gentle, like a whisper of what had been building between us all evening. I could feel the faint warmth of her hand, the steady pulse beneath her skin, and the subtle tremor that came from surprise, or perhaps from the closeness itself. We both froze for a moment, our eyes locking in silent acknowledgement. There was a heartbeat of shared awareness, where the space between us seemed suspended in time. The laughter that followed was quiet, almost breathless, a mingling of embarrassment and delight. Her lips curved into a soft, teasing smile, and I realized just how profoundly alive the room felt in her presence. As she settled the notebook back on the desk, she leaned slightly closer under the pretense of rearranging it, and our shoulders brushed. It was accidental yet deliberate in the most subtle way. The warmth of her body pressed against mine for the briefest instant, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the lingering aroma of coffee. My chest tightened, and I realized that every movement, every glance, every small, unintentional touch had been leading to this moment of undeniable closeness. Her eyes met mine, wide and sincere, and in them I saw the same mixture of surprise, amusement, and quiet longing that I felt. No words were necessary. The silence between us was more powerful than any declaration. The tension that had been simmering throughout the evening finally found its release. Not in words, not in grand gestures, but in the subtle, shared understanding that we were more aware of each other now than ever before. Our fingers brushed once more as she adjusted her sleeve, lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The warmth of her hand against mine felt grounding, comforting, and exhilarating all at once. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance further, but instead, I let the moment breathe, letting the connection speak for itself. In that instant, I realized that the story between us had shifted. The hesitant glances, the accidental touches, the quiet pauses, all of it had built toward this unspoken acknowledgement of desire and intimacy. It wasn't overt, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and the beauty of it lay in its subtlety. A hand brush, a shared smile, a heartbeat felt rather than spoken. By the end of this scene, the emotional peak had been reached. We both sat back, smiling quietly, hearts racing just enough to know something profound had shifted. The connection was no longer tentative. It was present, alive, and undeniable. The tension remained, but it was sweet, promising, and entirely ours. The room felt softer now, bathed in the gentle glow of the desk lamp. The earlier tension had settled into a quiet warmth, like the remnants of sunlight lingering after a golden evening. We both sat a little closer than before, not intentionally, but because proximity had become effortless, comfortable, and even necessary. There was no urgency in the air, just the lingering awareness of what had passed between us, and the subtle thrill of what might come. Then, as if on cue, the aunt returned. Her voice carried a cheerful energy that filled the room, announcing her presence with playful ease. "I hope I didn't miss all the fun," she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling with amusement. She had no idea, of course, of the quiet, electric moments that had unfolded in her absence. For a fleeting second, my shoulders tensed, aware of how easily the intimacy we had nurtured could dissolve under the weight of her presence. But the sister leaned back slightly, giving a small, knowing smile. It was as if she were silently reassuring me. The connection we had cultivated wasn't erased by interruptions. It was ours to keep. Our eyes met across the space, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the room disappeared. A gentle, unspoken understanding passed between us, one that didn't need to be articulated. What we shared in the quiet moments was real, meaningful, and mutual. As the aunt busied herself with small tasks around the room, we allowed ourselves the smallest gestures of connection. A brush of hands while passing a notebook, a lingering glance that held a question and an answer all at once, a soft smile that spoke of trust, comfort, and affection. Each moment was understated yet charged with meaning, proving that romance doesn't always need grand declarations. It can thrive in small, intentional acts of closeness. At one point, she leaned slightly forward, resting her elbows on the desk, and I mirrored her posture, our knees brushing once more. The warmth of her leg against mine was subtle but grounding, a gentle reminder that the bond between us had deepened. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. The intimacy was in the shared silence, in the small, tender gestures, in the way our presence alone was enough. Finally, as the evening drew to a close, it was time to part ways. The sisters stood, and for a moment we hesitated, neither wanting to break the spell of the evening. I reached out, letting my hand brush hers in a gesture that was both simple and profound. Her fingers lingered lightly in mine, the warmth and steadiness of her touch a perfect echo of everything that had transpired. Her smile was soft, genuine, and just a little shy. "Thank you for today," she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of sincerity. I nodded, my chest tight with the quiet thrill of connection. "Anytime," I replied, feeling the promise behind the word, the unspoken acknowledgement that this was only the beginning of something meaningful. As the door closed behind her, the room felt emptier, yet fuller at the same time. The chaos of the evening, the interruptions, the small touches and glances, they had all culminated in a moment of emotional completeness. I realized that the connection we shared wasn't fleeting. It was grounded in respect, warmth, and mutual understanding. The night ended with a sense of quiet fulfillment. The slow-burn tension had blossomed into genuine intimacy, and though nothing had been overtly declared, the promise of what could be lingered in every glance, every heartbeat, and every memory of the evening. The story had reached its satisfying close, soft, romantic, and entirely human. If you enjoyed this slow burn story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt romances. Comment below, what would you do if you were in his shoes? And hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story that warms your heart.